Zoom before. There we go. Okay, so again, for those of you just joining us, we are going over the foundations of pre-literacy just to fill a need that we've seen in our incoming students for our ESL courses. A lot of them are not literate in their first languages, or they have very interrupted formal education or no formal education whatsoever. So if at any point you have questions, feel free to jump in and stop me. I can hopefully provide clarifying points, and anything to contribute from your own experiences is also super valuable. So let's make this big. Foundations of literacy. All right. Then we just did quick introductions and a favorite book that everybody shared. So what we'll cover in this presentation is, and not in this order, but thinking about what is literacy and what is reading. Are they the same? Where do they overlap if they're not exactly the same? What challenges are there in helping our students become literate? So student-specific challenges, but also challenges of teaching someone to read. For those of you who have had kiddos and gone through that process, I'm sure you can also relate. And then different ways to approach these challenges. And then also I'll be giving you some relevant resources, some that we have here in Catholic Charities for our volunteers, teachers, and tutors, but then also some on the web that are free and great. So also, I don't know if I can see if anyone pops into the waiting room, but if someone can just give me a shout if that does need to happen. So, all right. So just some warm-up questions. Try to remember how you learned how to read. And do you remember, was there a magic moment when it all clicked? Or I know some of you are language teachers. Do you ever see this in your students and you suddenly see a light bulb go off or making connections? I do want to make your faces bigger. I see some nods. So great. And then we'll also be considering, what does it mean to be literate? And what are barriers to becoming literate? And reasons for illiteracy. Again, those could be the structure of education, whether it was like highly privatized in the country of origin, so the families didn't have money, or if they are refugees moving from country to country, maybe they never actually had a chance to be in a formal classroom setting or learn, and then processes that make up literacy. So anything anyone wants to contribute? I'm kind of raising through the discussion questions just for the sake of time. All right, cool. So again, just jump in if you have a burning question. So things to think about with our students, just to consider. So the different first languages they come from in your group, whether or not you have more than one first language. And sometimes you get students that are literate in a language of wider communication, such as Spanish or Arabic or French, but their home language, their heart language, their mother tongue, all the same thing, is a smaller, less populated ethnic language or a minority language. So you do see some learning gaps there. And then whether or not they're literate in that first language. So again, in the example of a small minority language, it would be, they wouldn't necessarily be literate in that language. It might not have a writing system. So they may have learned different sound to letter ratio, sound to letter correspondences in French or Arabic or the language of the schooling. So, and then their educational background, again, whether they have some more than you, less than you, none at all. Home country and culture, their age and experience. So if any of you have experience teaching adults versus teaching little kids, some of it is different. The motivations and thinking processes and a lot of the experience they come from and come with. So a big thing that we try to hit on with our volunteers in teaching adults is the adults a lot of times need to know the why. Why are they learning this? What do they lose by not learning it? And for our part, we try to have very practical curriculum units, not necessarily focusing on grammar this and punctuation that, but we have employment, health units, family and friends, etc. So more practical. And again, we'll hit on that as we go through. So And then English proficiency, the English proficiency of your student, if any, and sometimes there is none. So even very basic classroom functions like, raising your hand or asking, what does this mean? Or asking for like even a nod can sometimes be a longer process than you ever would have thought. So, and then there are also cultural and personal ideas that surround literacy. So maybe there's a stigma surrounding illiteracy, and they, never had a chance, but they really wanted to, but they feel like they're too old now. So, yeah, so just things to think about with your students. So now we have some definitions of what it means to be literate, and again, for simplicity's sake, I will just read through them myself. But later down the road, I might ask other people to read as my voice tires out. So just the ability to read and write. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary, pretty straightforward. Next, we have reading is a process in which information from the text and the knowledge possessed by the reader act together to produce meaning. So this important part is not just reading and being able to sound things out, but the comprehension, the meaning behind that. So, which is usually a good thing. So, illiterate is one who, in a language that he speaks, can read and understand anything he would have understood if it had been spoken to him, and who can also write so that it can be read, anything that he can speak. So that's kind of like, you got to work your mind around it, but it's basically a two-way between, or maybe 2 or 3-way interaction between speaking, writing, and reading. So probably 3. And then listening comprehension as well is kind of entailed. And then last one from UNESCO. A person is literate when he has acquired the essential knowledge and skills which enable him to engage in all those activities in which literacy is required for effective functioning in his group and community, whose attainments in reading, writing, and arithmetic make it possible for him to continue in those skills. So what I want to hit on here is the arithmetic is something. So we have sometimes you hear there are classes in financial literacy, or we also hear the word numeracy. So I think Nancy was asking if she'd have to reteach numbers to some of the incoming students, and I'm still waiting for an answer on that. I believe they've been working all day, so I don't have a text from them. Anyways, and then this is a highly functional definition. So like literacy for the purpose of being able to function in your community, not necessarily for reading for pleasure or reading so you can teach yourself things like learning how to learn. So, all right, so what is reading? Great question. I am glad you asked. So we'll be going through this handy dandy graphic called Scarborough's Reading Rope, and you have a copy of this in your handout. And yours is slightly different. It has, I don't know if you can see on my tiny screen now, but it has little subcategories. So we'll be going through those together. So we're going to start with the top strand and then take a brief break and then go over the bottom strand. And so I like this illustration because it just gets at how complex reading is, and the idea you can have, like, if you have a poorly constructed rope, that translates to being a less fluent reader, but there are always ways to strengthen that and strengthen different strands. So it's a cool metaphor. All right. So starting with the top strand is background knowledge. Gotta make your faces smaller again. So this illustration is, so this would be at a level for, someone learning to read, but the content, the background knowledge is maybe something they're not familiar with. So if they have no concept of this in their home language, it's much harder to teach it. So, and again, that's why we and other ESL teaching organizations try to have more relevant content and curricula. So what building background knowledge may look like in other classrooms is, previewing the text and making predictions together as a class, or writing comprehension questions to help focus your reading experience, or videos, field trips, anything, you know. So if you start a unit on the colors in kindergarten, maybe you'll go through the Crayola factory. So that's a bit about background knowledge. So, and again, what this looks like for our students is going through their day-to-day lives. One thing we like to do is have them bring in a picture, show a picture on their phones. Phones are a great resource, and talk about and help develop vocabulary to talk about what's important to them and why. So, and then these are actual screenshots. Some of you may recognize them from some of our books that we use with our students. And another thing to help build background knowledge is you can compare these two alphabet charts. One is just straight up letters, which is good. But then the idea here is if you have multiple senses, oops, I just wanted to move the faces, not, here we go. Then you see the one on the right-hand side has the different pictures of the bugs. So the idea is you'll have more concepts to anchor the letter or the letter knowledge if you have, you know, a picture to go with it. And so we'll have other better examples later down the road. So because it was pointed out to me that these are all very different specific types of bugs. Like if you look at the one for the letter X, it's the Xerxes butterfly, and nobody's going to need to know that. So at least not at our level. So, all right, and then moving on, more ways to build background knowledge specifically at the literacy level. It could be as simple as teaching the alphabet song. You could have some bananagram tiles. We like to call these manipulatives. I'm sure you are familiar, those of you with teaching backgrounds. And then I would also say at the literacy level, it's important to focus on vowels. So you can see how the vowels in this flashcard set are highlighted. Because that comes in handy later down the road for building on the background knowledge. So in this case, it's building background knowledge of the English letters and their sounds. Oh, and you can also see sometimes you'll have to help students. You have A and G specifically in this set written differently. And so sometimes students might not know that those are the same letters, same with capital versus lowercase. So just building those connections that we might not realize we even have as native English speakers. So you'll excuse me, I'll grab my water bottle. All right, so this is a bit of participation. So, all right, I can't see who's on mute or not, but
everybody's on mute, it looks like.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, that's all right. So can you tell me what this top left-hand picture is? Someone?
Potato chips.
Yes, good, thank you. I think that was April. All right, and then the next picture moving across as you would read it.
Microchip.
Mm-hmm. Good, and the next one?
Wood chips.
Wood chips.
Good, and moving to the bottom row. Oopsie. All I want to do is move your faces so I can see.
Broken tooth.
Mm-hmm. Is there another word for that?
Chip tooth.
Mm-hmm. And this last one is a bit trickier.
French fries.
Mm-hmm.
Chips, but in England.
Yes,
In
good,
England.
April. So yes, in England, I believe they are called chips. So, and so the this is sorry. So this is moving on to a new section, the vocabulary knowledge. I forgot to note that. So yeah. So what we did was we have a lot of different referents, a lot of different things or phenomena we would see in the world that we could refer to as a chip, and someone might know what you mean based on other context. Sometimes you would learn British English. So sometimes you get students who have been traveling around a lot, whether it be for migrant work or as refugees, and so they might not understand or they might be using the word chip in a way that we wouldn't, like potato chip versus fries. So, and then you also have the kind of the converse of this, that think of all the different ways you can say said. So it basically means, you know, to do a speech act, right? But we have many different ways to say one thing essentially, but then again with chip, it was one way to say many different things. So these are all ways you can help build vocabulary knowledge or build awareness of vocabulary knowledge in yourself as the instructor. So, all right, so this is, let's see, Nancy, I'm going to ask you to read lines 1 through 17 for us.
Min calls the doctor's office. She talks to a nurse. The doctor wants to see Lon. The nurse makes an appointment. They wait in the waiting room. The nurse calls Lon's name. She checks Lon's weight. She checks Lon's height. They go to an exam room. She takes Lon's pulse. She takes Lon's blood pressure. She takes Lon's temperature. The doctor comes in. She asks, "What's wrong?" Min says Lon is sick. She says Lon has a fever and headache. She says Lon has fatigue and muscle pain.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So this is reading straight out of one of our health textbooks and for level 1. So this is the closest level we have to literacy level students, which is why we're seeing it. So, so just as a group exercise, how many different words here do you see in the reading that indicate speaking? So again, we're looking for the synonyms for said. You need to shout it out when you have an answer.
I think I see 4.
Okay, yeah. Can you tell us which ones they are?
Talks, calls, the nurse calls Lon's name. She asks in number 14 and then says in 15, 16, 17.
Great, and I think those are the exact, yes, those are the ones I have as well. So good, thanks, April. So again, this is just an example of how we build vocabulary knowledge. Ooh, Teresa's here. So yes, this is an example of how we build vocabulary knowledge in our level 1 students, and you might have to simplify it a bit to maybe just 1 or 2 synonyms for literacy level, or even just build that says, you'll focus on 1 and connect it to the act of speech. So, right, and moving bases again. So hi Teresa, I saw you come in. All right,
Hi
and
there.
then sorry, I'm sharing my screen, so I can't exactly see your face, but I heard you. So, all right. Another way to build vocabulary knowledge, then, we try to focus on, especially in the lower levels, substitution drills, and so that gets at repetition, and it helps build confidence in the student's ability to produce correct language, and they can hear each other also be speaking and misspeaking. So examples and non-examples. So this is just an example again from one of our level 1 books. So, and then just this little blurb that consistency is key. So sticking, at least in the literacy level, when they may not know simple classroom routines like raising the hand, or, you know, can you circle this or highlight this? What is, can you spell that for me? So using the same phrasing is usually pretty important, especially for the literacy level. So, Teresa or Terry, so just to orient you, we are going through Scarborough's reading rope. And so we'd gone through what it looks like to build background knowledge, and then what it looks like to build vocabulary knowledge for in general, and then at a literacy level. So we were here. So more ways to build vocabulary knowledge at a literacy level. Again, this will come back over and over, but just using a bunch of different senses. If you can get students up and moving, a lot of you have heard of and probably used total physical response. So TPR, getting the hands and mind and body engaged. Common one is head, shoulders, knees, and toes with the body parts. That's always fun. I know Anne does this with her students. And then in the middle, you see a graphic that represents the 4 components of language, the 4 language skills. So like listening, writing, speaking, and reading. And so sometimes students, whether it be personal or cultural, bent towards one or the other of these skills or a combination thereof. So repeating one thing in a bunch of different ways. So saying it, writing it out, having the student read it back to you, having them say it back to you so you know they heard you correctly. Just getting all of these senses involved helps anchor that knowledge and build connections and pathways as well as confidence. So, and then also picture dictionaries are a great way to build knowledge, especially if there is a language barrier, like there usually is at the literacy level. And I have one for us, and let me see if I can do this without. I don't actually want to stop sharing my screen because I don't know if I can get it back in a timely manner, but just know that for our volunteers, teachers, and tutors, we have many versions of picture dictionaries in our ESL library that are available. We have a ton of versions of the Oxford Dictionary. I guess you can kind of see a small version of it on my thumbnail. So those resources are available to you. So language structure, moving on to the next strand of the reading rope. What this looks like, we call this syntax, grammar, etc. And you won't need to really teach your literacy level students these words for, subject, object, verb, but just be aware that this is something that differs among first languages, and ESL students make grammar mistakes that we as native speakers would not make. And sometimes that's based on their native language. So example in, I'm pretty sure I have a Spanish teacher here, so I feel self-conscious talking about Spanish, but so adjective order at French as well, I believe. And also subject, object, verb order, different in different languages, as you can see in the chart. So, all right. So again, you won't really need to do much with language structure at the literacy level. But awareness of your own language structure may help you identify errors that your learners are making even early on. So it's good for you as the tutor just to be aware of. Verbal reasoning, moving on to the next strand. So in higher level classes and even in our own school systems, we see idioms and slang. And so these are fun. So we have a conversation circle that runs in the evenings, and a lot of students bring questions about idioms and slang that they've heard either on TikTok or at the workplace. And so it's always fun hearing them try and discuss and be like, why does that even mean that? Because a lot of times, we don't know. So again, this is something that you probably won't have to deal with your literacy level learners. And if you do, good luck explaining it through the language barrier, but we can always try and pool our resources. So other verbal reasoning skills include metaphors, similes, analogies, blanking on the word, intuition. But Amelia Bedelia, so figurative language, those are fun kids books with idioms, I believe. So one thing to note is that, again, this is good for us to reflect on as instructors. While our students may not be bringing us questions about verbal reasoning skills like this, a lot of times we use terms and figurative language unconsciously. So, and one way we see this we do have some units on this in our level 3 classes, phrasal verbs. So they most often look like a verb and a preposition put together, and they can be used in a variety of different ways. There can be an object in between them, but they don't necessarily always mean literally what they may seem. So to hand in, and someone who is just learning body parts, hand, like what does that mean? Like my hand is in the pudding, but like that doesn't necessarily mean hand in the homework. It's a different meaning. So it's a type of verbal reasoning. Yeah, so this is an example from our level 3 book in phrasal verbs. Again, this isn't something you'll really need for literacy level learning, but it is something that we very unconsciously use. So okay, and then literacy knowledge, the last strand in our top portion of the reading rope. So in higher levels, literacy knowledge looks like studying different genres of writing. So is this persuasive, or is this, what is it, interrogative questions? So that could be like a level 2, an intermediate level question or activity, turn this statement into an interrogative. In literacy level, again, this looks like letter identification. You see a lot of students getting certain letters mixed up, as you can see illustrated, and as you can probably imagine, the M and the N, Q, P, B, D. Yeah, you can see it with bed, etc. Also, it doesn't help that they are sometimes similar sounds. So especially if you have a learner coming from a language that is not alphabetic. So, and then you also have different forms of lowercase letters, as you can see in the G with fishhook or the loop tail. And then this doesn't even start to cover handwriting or cursive, which I would recommend you stay away from, at least cursive. So, and basic punctuation marks, you would probably only be dealing with periods, commas, the air quotes, I'm so sorry, quotation marks, there we go, at literacy level. And so an example from our level 1, this is what they do the very first week of each session that we have, just filling in the alphabet chart, and notice the directions say, how do you say the names of the letters, and what sound does the letter make? What do the letters sound like? Because those are different. So building that knowledge of the letter name, the letter sound, the written form is key. And then we'll talk about that later in some of the bottom strands. And then here's another activity that I saw demonstrated pretty effectively. Ooh, go back. So this is the Handwriting House. And if you especially want to just teach some, everyday vocabulary, you can have a picture of a house up on the board. And so this helps with letter formation. So to form the letter O, you would say, you start at the ceiling and loop it all the way to the floor and bring it back up to the ceiling, versus, a D would extend all the way up into the attic. And so if you're interested, I can send you the YouTube video. It's from Literacy Minnesota, I believe. And they are teaching a class with this activity, which looked super fun. So, all right, and then a bit more on activities you can use for building literacy knowledge. And again, at this level, this is letter knowledge. You can have the students make their own flashcards. In the video with the house, the students are actually practicing their letters, so they can write their own letter flashcard at the end of the activity. And then you can do matching with lowercase to uppercase letters. You can also have some individual whiteboards just to be practicing. It's kind of fun, especially they don't have the fine motor skills, if they have never learned how to write something like a bigger pen or pencil or marker in this case. Pipe cleaner letters are fun. And then sometimes pre-writing preparation. So that's what this bottom right-hand worksheet is. Again, just getting at aimed at the students who may not have any writing background, is how to hold a pencil and building up those fine motor skills. Because I remember when I learned how to play the flute, my hands were cramping so badly because it was just completely new. So, and that's the same again with writing implements. So let's I'm going to stop recording so I can break this up into shorter. Where's the buttons? Stop share. And